Nothing is real, and everything is a battle of stories. Our entire perceived reality is just a made-up story, a concoction of sorts, made up of multiple scraps of different stories mixed together. And there are many storytellers that have the ability to influence how this overall story that we are all experiencing is going. Many storytellers with many type of minds, many type of visions, which find themselves in a constant war with each other. It's like the entire world would be a blank canvas, and there are many painters which want to paint a different picture. And this is why this world looks as chaotic and turbulent and mad as it does. It's because these different storytellers have different type of minds. They are far from being unified and united in one single vision, one single type of image of what our common story is about. So because there are these different type of storytellers with different type of power to write and rewrite this common story that we are in, this common story is like a chariot which is pulled in different directions by different horses. And this is why, again, this reality looks as turbulent, as mad and insane as it does. Because this is what happens when you can't correlate together different types of mindsets, different types of visions. You have a story which is being pulled into so many different directions that ultimately that story becomes completely incoherent. It stops making any sense. So we find ourselves in a battlefield of stories. Some of us, not each and every one of us, but some of us, we have the ability, let's say we have a powerful ability to write up this story. And there are powerful storytellers here in this reality which have a powerful influence over how this overall story goes. And this is these storytellers, in a way, we could divide them into two categories. We can say that there are the storytellers which try to pull the story into a unnatural, denaturated version of the story. And then there are the storytellers which want to pull the story into its correct, natural, original form. And when we look, for example, in the media and the events that are being broadcasted over the entire earth right now, especially popular events, worldwide events, sometimes I believe that these events are just mere fabrications, just mere stories but they are given to the public as if these events were real, because if you create such a idea that that event happened, then the public can believe that that event really happened, and then it is sedimented in the minds of the populace that that reality is actually real. So this is how you make a reality real. You start from nothing in a way. You start from an idea, a vision, a concept, but you insert it in reality in such a powerful way that then it becomes adopted as being the real, and then it becomes the real, if that makes sense. And likewise, there are, let's say, most media sources like television and YouTube and whatever, mostly everything we find in the media, I believe it comes from the dark, corrupted storytellers, which are working to pull the story in a denaturated, unnatural version of itself. And the dark storytellers are not only using what we could describe as evil or bad events. The dark storytellers are also using what we could describe as beneficial or good events. So the dark storytellers might fabricate an event which appears to be something good, but in fact it serves the dark agenda to pull the story away from its natural character and its original meaning and into a denaturated version of itself, even if that denaturation was achieved through what the public would consider as a good event. So the dark storytellers are using both good and bad in their favor. And we could even say that the light, or the, let's say, genuine storytellers, which are working to pull the story in the right direction, in the natural version of the story, we could even say that even these genuine storytellers are using both good and bad to pull the story in the natural direction. Because sometimes what is perceived as being bad is not necessarily bad, and what is perceived to be good is not necessarily good. So the genuine storytellers might provoke an event or tell the story in such a way in which at first it might appear to be negative. But in fact, that negative view, that negative concept, what appears at first to be negative, is actually what it is needed to pull the story in its natural, correct version. So if you only use the surface type of evaluation of things, where we evaluate a thing according to the surface understanding of it, of good and bad, then we would not be able to discern properly what type of force is using that good or bad event to pull us in what direction. So we have to cultivate within ourselves a sense of invisible, let's say, sense of perception, an extra sense of perception, which is an inner eye, the eye of the heart, not the third eye, but the eye of the heart. And with this eye of the heart, which is the eye of truth, we can evaluate. We can see beyond the surface level, then the surface understanding of things. And once we have this, let's say, deeper sight, we can then see, truly see, what type of storyteller comes from the dark, let's say, the dark forces, and what type of storyteller comes from the genuine, let's say, sources. And I refrain from calling them light sources because I actually do not see them as light beings necessarily, just genuine, original, true storytellers, which are far from being in opposition in a way with the dark forces. The originals are what is always true, and it's never changing, while the dark storytellers only exist for some time, and they are temporal in a way. So the originals are going to remain, and The original story is always going to prevail eventually, because of the way everything is designed to be. So the genuine storytellers, you can see them and notice them only with your heart. Because if you measure the words of somebody only through what your mind distinguishes on a surface level of understanding, then you might very well consider that a genuine storyteller, an original being, is what could be perceived by one's mind as evil, you know. One's mind might perceive a certain action done by an original and genuine being as being negative, you know. But again, that perceived negative concept or idea or event might actually be a true, correct, genuine one, which is able to pull the story back into its natural form. So we have to stay away from surface thinking and surface evaluation of things. We have to look with the eye of the heart, always. And again, the dark beings might create extremely, let's say, positive or heartwarming events on a surface level, like we would see in the so-called New Age movement, which is filled with positive spirituality and rainbows and butterflies of sorts. And this type of positive thinking and positive spirituality might actually, in all effects, come from a dark agenda of trying to pull the story in an incorrect and unnatural version of itself. Luckily, we have true heart seers, which are able to see beyond the facade of so many of these fake positive events and see the darkness behind them. So we are finding ourselves in the battlefield of stories, and I believe not everybody is a storyteller. I believe only some have the power of storytelling. And these beings have described themselves as creator beings. But I would describe them as storytellers. I think it's a bit more accurate in the entire dynamic of our existence. It's a bit more accurate to describe them as storytellers. And so I believe not all of us are storytellers or have the ability to influence the common story we are all living in. There are only some beings that have this ability. So there are dark storytellers, and then we have the, let's say, genuine or simply said light storytellers. But again, I refrain from using these concepts of light and dark, because the true light has zero opposition. The genuine original storytellers, the genuine original beings, they will never have opposition to them, because they are the originals. They are the thing that truly exists, and it is going to exist beyond this experience and beyond this world, because they are true existences. So they have zero opposition. There is nothing opposing them ever. The darkness, the so-called opposition, the apparent opposition, I see it as a temporal, let's call it exercise of sorts. But at some point this exercise is going to be over, and the originals are going to remain beyond the finality of this exercise. So in this apparent exercise or game or movie, cosmic game, cosmic movie, whatever we want to call it by now, we have a true, a genuine way opposition of forces between the genuine, true creators or storytellers and the dark creators and the dark storytellers. And the property of the dark storytellers is that they are always just trying to manipulate and distort the original story. So in a way, the dark storytellers have no power of writing something new, a new story. They just have the power to sometimes deeply, deeply distort to unrecognizable levels the single and original story that is ever existing and being told by the genuine and original storytellers. So the dark storytellers, they have almost no creativity or no power to invent something new. They just have the power to distort. But this is a power on its own that has to be taken into account, because this distortion that the dark storytellers are capable of is intensely powerful. And it can distort the original story, as I said, in unimaginable ways. Sometimes unrecognizable, making it unrecognizable, making it the antithesis of itself. So this is when true goodness is turned into evil. This is when the dark forces are having the ability to take the true original and, let's say, good, archetypically good story, original, genuine story, and distort it in such a way in which it becomes the antithesis of itself. It becomes pure evil, pure madness. So all the evil that we are experiencing paradoxically is nothing more than our true original story, our true original reality, but distorted in such a way in which it becomes unrecognizable. And because of this unrecognition, it becomes unuseful. Like, we cannot use things properly, we cannot see things properly, we cannot recognize things properly. And because we cannot recognize them properly, we cannot use them properly. And it is out of this wrong usage of the things around that we end up being hurt. So this is the true source of suffering. It's not necessarily, karmic suffering, or because you're doing wrong to somebody, now you have to suffer, or how it was said in the Hindu religions or in the Buddhist, that they say that this reality is inherently a painful word and a word of suffering. It is right now a word of suffering because it has become the antithesis of itself. But originally, the original story is the pure version of the story in which everything is seen correctly, completely recognized as what it is, and we use things in full knowledge of what we are and what the things around us are. So we use things in their perfect designed form, and thus we never feel suffering. There is zero need for suffering because we use things correctly. So that's how it is when we tell the right story, and by telling the right story we enact it out and it becomes alive for all of us. And thus, by telling the right story, we diminish the experience of suffering, because telling the right story means recovering our true senses of perception as well, where we see things correctly again. Things stop being distorted and they are seen and become again what they truly are. So seeing them correctly, seeing ourselves correctly, we start using them correctly. So in the true story, we are in a perfect ace and flow with the entirety of life, and there is zero need of suffering. But in the distorted story, yes, suffering is indeed inherited in the experience of the distorted story. So, as much as we have dark storytellers which are pulling that story, the original perfect story, in a distorted and denaturated version of itself, as much as we have suffering. As much as we have the true, original, genuine storytellers being able to remember themselves and summon up the power to retell the original story in its correct form, as much the suffering of the world diminishes for everybody. So right now what we see in society is just a battle of stories. Everybody, from being, let's say, every storyteller is trying to tell the story according with its own design. The genuine storytellers are naturally inclined to tell the true original story, while the dark storytellers are trying to just pull the original story in unnatural and denaturated ways. And then you have the mass of the population which just repeats. They are just repeating what they hear. So they cannot, I believe that the mass of the population cannot create a new story, but they can adopt either the true original story coming from the true and genuine creator beings, true and genuine storytellers, or they can adopt the dark stories coming from the dark forces. So the mass populace is like, a force, in a way, a mass force which in a way can be influenced by these two type of stories, the dark story and the true story. So this is where the individual, the individual human being has a choice, in a way, because it can allow itself to be influenced by the dark forces and the dark story, the distorted, denaturated story, and adopt that story as being real for its own life, or take its information, take its influence from the true and genuine beings which are still here in this reality right now, and adopt those ideas, those concepts, those actualities and events and actions into their own lives. So this is where the populace has a choice. It can implement and conduct itself in accordance with the influence of the darkness, or in accordance with the influence of the original and genuine storytellers and genuine and original story of our entire existence, which is going to prevail eventually, because that's the only story that ever exists. That's the true story. As I said, the dark forces have zero power in creating a new story. They can only distort our original and true story. And us, the true and genuine storytellers, we can just do our best to retell the story in its correct form. And this is the so-called battle of stories. So everything that you see in the media, all the events that are being broadcasted to the population, most of them, they are just fake. They are just created to create a sensation or an influence upon the mind and the soul / emotions, feelings of the populace. So most things that happen, I don't believe they even happen. Even things like wars, and I think they are freaking fabricated stories broadcasted in the media, given to the population to make the population believe that those events, those wars or whatever even happened. I don't believe, I think some of them might have happened, but it's really rare that a true war actually happens. It's a lot of reasons for why it's preferable it does not. There are going to be, if a true war was to happen, there are going to be so many loss of resources, and I can tell you that right now, at the stage that we are in, this story can barely, the distorted story, can barely have energy to sustain itself anymore. So it's just like clinging from the tiniest sources of power and energy to sustain itself. And it is not, it's far from putting itself in jeopardy by consuming true resources to go to war or jeopardize their limited amount of energy that they are able to sustain themselves with at this moment. So true wars, even historically, I have the sensation that they never truly happened in the way they were meant or said that they did happen. As I said, maybe sometimes there were true wars happening, but I think those events were really rare, and the game itself, the dark forces didn't enjoy that, because there was a lot of losing of energy from their side, a lot of losing of resources, which usually the dark forces, they are keen on preserving energy, preserving resources. Just they are extremely obsessed with preserving energy, time, resources, preserving things. So this is why it's easier to create a fabulation, to create an illusion that a war is going on, rather than to truly go at war, and risk truly expending those precious saved resources on which they depend to be able to have the energy to retell or to tell the dark stories, basically. So this is why I believe that most of our reality is just a freaking fabrication, told through newspapers, media, books. Now we have YouTube and internet in nowadays, but in the past it might have been word of mouth, it might have been books, it might have been, any type of thing, even rituals, even customs, like social customs, stories, folklore, myths. So many things could have been used by the dark forces to basically inflict upon the mind of the true beings this idea of the wrong story and the wrong vision and the distorted and denatured version of the story, so that they believe it and they make it real. Because that's the thing, that, as I said, like most of the populace, I think I will have to stay a bit more with this, so I'll feel sure about what I'm going to say, but I'm just going to say what I just have like a glimpse of it right at off the top, in a way, of my head, but I just see it a bit. But I'll have to stay more with it in the long term to actually feel more certain about what I'm going to say right now. But I think that the populace has a sort of like creative power, but it's like it's a raw creative power, but without direction. So the populace is not necessarily able to tell an original story through their own power, because it's like they don't have the power of telling a story, but they can retell a certain story and they can make it real. They have the power to actualize a reality, but they don't have the power to create reality, if that makes sense. They only have the power of manifestation, but not of, let's say, conceiving a reality. So I think the majority of the populace has a sort of power of manifesting reality. And whatever it is being fed to the populace is like a raw power, like a raw horse of sorts. And this raw power is able to manifest then reality. So if the dark forces are using the media to create some type of events, war in I don't know, Iran or whatever, because I'm far from being up to date with anything which is being broadcasted in the media more usually. But if, let's say, the dark forces are creating this type of events, we have war now in, Iraq, or who knows what happens in the USA, or China collapsing the whatever economy or whatever. It's just a freaking idea, basically. Sometimes backed up by some, fake pictures or movies or videos or, eyewitnesses or whatever. It's just enough to create a story, like in a Hollywood, exactly like in a Hollywood, movie. You create a story, you give it to the populace as if being real or true news, which I believe most news are just fake news. Just mostly 99% of them, I think they are mostly fake. Or let's say 90, especially the high, events. They are fabricated, in my opinion. Almost everything, I think, is fabricated in this realm, in a way. So then you give those events made up in a Hollywood fashion, like exactly like actors in a movie. You give it to the populace through YouTube, through television, through newspapers, through whatever coverage, podcasts and whatever. And then the populace now truly believes that event happened. There is a war in Iraq. The collapse of economy. What are we going to do? And then the populace, through their raw force, is being used for the raw force to create and manifest and generate and sustain that reality in place. So the dark storytellers are coming up with a scenario, with a dark scenario. They are broadcasting it over the media, And then the populace, the energy of the populace is used to sustain and to keep that dark scenario in usage. And then you have the genuine storytellers, which are really few, and usually they are like completely, usually they are the true storytellers, the genuine storytellers. They have a really, really hard time. They are like Gulliver in the world of Lilliputans. So they are like these gigantic, enormous beings, but they are, you know, strained down and kept in such a low state of existence by so many factors, so many things are created to keep them down, to keep them unaware of who they are, to not give them even a clue that they are as powerful as they truly are. So it's just so much is created for these true beings, true creator beings, to make them, to keep them in an unawareness of their true power that they have over the entire reality. So it's like usually they go through difficult childhoods. They usually do not have any support or little support in this world. They are made to feel the worst of the worst, the weakest of the weak, and still throughout all this hardship that is applied to them, they still have the true burning fire in them, the fire of life. And they usually manage to somehow resurface from all that pain that they usually are subjected to and remember themselves. It's like creating a sort of self-combustion in which they rekindle their own fire and they burst out, you know, and they start, sometimes they start truly taking their role seriously, remembering themselves and starting to retell the true story. And that's a rare occurrence in my opinion. I think when it happens, it's a big thing in this reality. And we can see that there are some true creator beings which have gone through this process. They've died and got rebirthed somehow. They've managed to do this by themselves with almost no help from anybody, no book, no teaching, nothing. They've just learned to do it by themselves somehow. And now they have learned how to re-merge and start to tell the true story. And they have a lot of power to them. So now the idea is that there are a lot of manipulations and a lot of hocus pocus type of hypnosis being done all day long, 24/7, upon the minds of everybody, even to conceal the fact that these true, genuine and powerful beings are in this reality right now. And they are very limited number of beings, really, really limited. But if you look in the media, you will never see anybody talking about these true beings. Either like the most you will see talking about anything in the world but this. It's like so many events happening always, so many contradictory events that were there with that beneficial thing there, that thing there, that thing there. But it's like no talk about the true genuine story, first of all. No talk about our true nature and what happens to all of us here and what this place is, truly. And no talk about these true powerful creator beings which exist here in this reality. And mostly they are unknown. They are not public figures most of the times. But they are present and they are here. And again, I have to emphasize on the idea of the limited number of these beings. I mean extremely limited. It's far from being the so-called 1%. It's not even 0.1%. I see it like really, really limited. Perhaps in the, I don't know, dozens or below 200. So it's a really limited number of these beings. So the idea is that the populace has power, and it has the power, in a way, to stir this entire story in the right direction. Because if the populace would take its influence from these true, original, and real storytellers, then, and they would adopt the populace, not only that they would take the information, but they would adopt the advices, they would adopt the actions which are being recommended and shown as an example by these true and real beings. If the populace would adopt these actions instead of adopting the, garbage type of mentality, concepts, ideas, and actions served by the dark forces, instead, if the populace would adopt the concepts, ideas, actions recommended and shown as an example by these true and original beings, then the populace would be able, through its raw power, to change our entire reality from the denaturated one to the original and true story of what we are all meant to experience. Because this is our birthright. Our true original story is what we are all meant to become and to experience. And it is inscribed in all of our hearts. And this is what we are all wanting to experience, with or without knowing. So to end this recording, I also want to make an important distinction which started to become more and more clear to me as of recent times. It's still not 100% clear, so I'm far from saying this is 100% like this, but I still want to add it in because I think it has a level of validity, but I still again need to look more into it internally, of course. So I want to end this recording with making a certain distinction between storyteller and story writer. So if I'm seeing this correctly, I think somehow there was, or there is, originally a single story writer. Or there might have been a group of beings which they created an original and wrote an original story. And after that story was written, that story became, in a way, locked in place. It became like carved in stone. It became 100% unmovable. So there is one single original story writing, which was already done, and it is already done. And then, or in other words, we could say there is one single original story writer, which writes or wrote this original story that we are all meant to live eventually. And then you have the storytellers, which can either be the dark storytellers, which are here to... No, let me put it this way. Can either be the genuine and true storytellers, which are here to tell the original story in the way it was written. So they are faithfully telling the story in the way the story truly goes. So they are faithfully keeping to the original story in the way the story is written. And then you have the dark storytellers, which are here to distort and to tell the story in a different way than the story is actually written. So this is what happens, in my opinion. We have an original story which was originally written by either a single being or a group of beings. And that's the original story, and that's the original story writer or story writers. Doesn't matter if it's singular or plural. It only matters to understand the concept, the idea that there is an original story which was written and is written, because time goes, in a way, both ways somehow. So it is written and was written simultaneously. So we have this original story which is being written, and then it's unmovable and unchangeable, and nothing can touch it, and no one can change it ever, because it is already set in stone. It is already an actuality which was created, which was written, let's say. And then you have the storytellers, and here we have the two classes of the genuine storytellers, as I mentioned, which are the true original storytellers, which are here to tell that story in the correct way in which the story was written and is written. And then you have the dark storytellers, the imposter, or whatever we want to call them, storytellers, which are here to distort, to tell the story in a different way than this story is actually written. And in the middle, you have the so-called populace, which has the power of generation and manifestation. Ew! It was a wasp, I think. God, Jesus Christ. It didn't sting me, huh? Okay, so in the middle we have the populace, which they might have, the populace, this power of generating and manifesting reality in accordance with where they get their information from, where they get their influence from. Are they getting their influence, their belief, their truth from the dark storytellers or from the genuine storytellers? Who they believe in more, in a way, who they give their trust, their power, their energy to. And I think this is somehow a basic outline of what is happening to us here. All that we are living in is a story. Never confuse what we are living in right now with reality, because this is far from being a reality. All of it is a story. The distorted story and the true original story, it's a story. Nonetheless, even if all of it is a story, there is an original story, and I believe this makes the purpose for why we are here in this so-called exercise, because I've described it, as I've mentioned, as an exercise, and I kind of see it right now as an exercise, not necessarily a game limited to only being a cosmic game, not necessarily a cosmic movie, but a sort of precise exercise of sorts, in which there are these dark forces which are trying to pull the story in an unnatural way, and then you have the true genuine beings which are working in a exercising some type of muscles and other type of skills to pull the story back in its correct and original form, basically to heal the story, because this is what denaturation does. It takes something from its original form and distorts it, creating pain and suffering, and to heal something means only to restore it to its original form. So, for example, when we cut ourselves on the skin and we bruise ourselves, for some time it hurts, but then the body restores our skin to its original form, and then there's no more pain. When the cut was restored to its original form, when the flesh was restored to its original form, the pain ceases. And these beings, the original storytellers, are here in a way to heal this entire reality by telling the story in its original form, and thus healing the story, healing the reality, and stopping the suffering. So all of it is a story, but I believe we are here to somehow manage that together we actualize our true and real original story, which was already written, is already written and decided. We only need to tell it correctly, and thus manifest it correctly in the outside world, and thus be able to live it out. We are here to live this correct original story, which can be equated, I believe, with the so-called heaven on earth, in the true way, not in the New Age-ish way, not in the religious way, but a true, real version of this existence which is inscribed in all of our hearts, and we all have it deep within us, and we know it very well. And we are destined, I believe, to live this story out. And this is an exercise for all of us to be able to put all our skills together, each of us with the skills that we have, to be able to generate, remember, and manifest, not only for ourselves, but for the entire existence, for the entire world, this original and true story. Yes, the original story is still a story, it's far from being reality, but I believe this is the reason, the main reason, for why we might actually be here, the true original beings. We might be here to actualize this true story. I want to end this recording by emphasizing again the distinction between reality and story. So we need, because I see that many beings do not still realize that what they are fighting for. They are fighting to create this true original story, to manifest this true original story in the outside of ourselves. Basically to be able to live this true original story, this true original destiny out. But what I see few beings realize is that what they are fighting for is actually to achieve experiencing this true story, and that this true story is still ultimately a story. And this is far from being a reality. Even the true original story is just a story. But it is our true story. And I believe it is the purpose for why everything is created here, and why we are here in the first place, and why we came here in the first place. To aid at the creation and manifestation of this true story back again, if that makes sense. Or maybe it wasn't, it was never actualized in the way we have the potential to actualize it right now together. But we have to keep in mind, for me, I'm saying mostly, that the distinction has to be clearly made. That even if we achieve the true story, and we know now what we are fighting for, we are fighting to manifest the true original version and true original vision of the true story that was already written, is already written and decided. But this is a story. And we have an existence outside of even this true story. So what we are, we exist outside of any story, outside of any creation. And we need to remember this, because I believe once one remembers that it exists outside of any story, even if that story is the original one or a distorted, denaturated version, once one understands and experiences basically its true existence outside of any story, it's only then that one has the true power, finally, to come here in the story and do whatever one is designed to do. So it's only after one has achieved full liberation, in a way, from all the stories, even the good story, the original story, and the dark stories, only one knows itself, knows its existence outside of any stories, then it starts to have true, enormous power here in the story. Because until that point, if one is still believing itself, its existence to be determined, let's say, by the original story, and taking the original story to be the ultimate existence, then one, in my opinion, is still rendered a bit ineffective in truly actualizing the original story. You have to know yourself outside of any story, and then you are able to have true power over everything that happens in the storyland. Then and only then you are able to have true power over how the story goes. But this is where you have to achieve this experience of knowing yourself as the true existence that exists outside of any story. And then you are able to come here in the storyland and do exactly what your purpose is. And when you come back, let's say, you are able to have almost unmatchable, unstoppable force, unstoppable power, unstoppable determination. Because now you know what you are, and you know your purpose, and you know your story, and you know what you are here for, and you remember the original story, and it becomes unstoppable. But up until that point, if you still believe yourself to be a character in the original story and not the true existence that exists outside of any story, you are still, in my opinion, a bit incapable of fully actualizing your true power to its full extent. So you're a bit weak. You're a bit incapable of fully be able to actualize your entire force, your entire potential in the world of stories. This is why I believe that it is almost like a prerequisite to be able to die, die before dying, die entirely for this world of stories. First, we have to go through the void. I always seem to come back to the same conclusion, that we have to meet the void. We have to understand the void. We have to become the void being the nothing at all, the so-called death. We have to be able to wash ourselves of all illusions. Even the original story, at some point we have to be able to let go of it. And let go of everything, everything that we truly is the dearest to us. Even the original story, even everything that we consider the most true. We have to be able to dip ourselves in the waters of the void and become the void, become the nothing, become in existence itself. And only then, after we became the void, we became pure nothing in existence itself, washed of everything, all desires, all fears, all illusions, everything, then finally and that's a direct experience that everyone is in my opinion, needing to have it on its own, is that only after you become nothing at all, only after you died in the, let's say, most ultimate form in which you became nothing at all, then finally you can be what you truly are. Then finally you can be, in a way, everything that you truly are. But up until that point, up until we accept completely the nothingness, the void, the inexistence itself, we are, in a way, kept away from being the fullest potential of what we are designed to be.